I was excited when you came out with, I think, 4 vision statements. And the first one, I guess, is extending the peace of Christ. I mean, that to me, what better vision could you have as a central goal for the church, is to extend the peace of Christ? I just think that's a marvelous thing. And I guess, for me, that washes into all kinds of area. I let my imagination run, and I say, hey, where is the peace of Christ being extended in the church now? And I guess, of course I'm biased here because I've been at Rebel for a number of years, and I think it's really exciting to see what PAX is doing through their Peace and Conflict Studies program at the university there. There the students, it's at the student level where they learn how to develop peaceful ways of working in the world. And often students are very idealistic, not always realistic, but on the other hand, we need that idealism to sort of wash into the community and show people how to live. And when they go on overseas assignments, both in Egypt, they've gone to Africa and all these places, they come back changed people. So that peace of Christ washes into their lives, but also then floods into the other kind of experiences with other people. One of the new kind of developments I'm seeing is what's been called spiritual formation, pastoral formation, around spirituality and all of that. But now I see it more intentionally working at the vertical. How does God work in your life? And so often the starting point is helping the person in pastoral formation look at what is their walk with God? How do they experience God in their life? How is God moving them and doing this and that? Any new pastor should have that kind of exposure to that kind of experience alongside. But I'm very biased also in favor of supervised pastoral education. The pastor should be trained for pastoral ministry in the congregation. And that's for me a very central kind of core. And that's why I'm glad to see the conference continuing their emphasis on what's called supervised experience in ministry that Mary Ann Millinger is operating alongside formal academic study. Yes, academic study is important in terms of having the knowledge of the biblical story, the narratives. We need to understand how the Bible came to be and what that story is all about, and also to exegete faithfully. Not just sort of on the surface kind of think this and that is what it says, but actually we ought to talk about it in terms of, how it impacts the people in the pew as well. One of the things you need to discover as a young pastor is find your spiritual center. What do I mean by that? For me, encountering the spiritual center is how do you encounter the divine in your life? What are the ways that God speaks to you? That's where a spiritual director can help you, give you some clues as to what you might do to find that center. Because that then becomes the channel which will energize you and resource you when you're in the midst of ministry. Say, when you're visiting somebody and you don't know what to say, sometimes the Spirit says, don't say a thing, just listen. Other times a word rightly spoken is just the right thing, and many times it is not. So one of the things I've learned as a pastor, too late sometimes, is to keep your mouth shut and listen. Because the ministry of presence is one of the most powerful ministries you can have. But then also there are times when you have to speak. That was one of the mantras that my supervisors taught me when I was in supervised training, is you are your ministry. How you come through as a person is more important than what you say. And that has always struck with me. And as young pastors, we often thought, oh, I have to say the right thing, or I've got to do this or that. Or when we go to a grieving person, what will I say to the family? The ministry of presence is often all that's needed. I would like us to rediscover the importance of community. I think at an experiential level, and I've mentioned this before, the disease of individualism has infiltrated our thinking so tremendously. It hits at the individual level, at the organizational level, and somehow to rediscover the joy of congregations as a community of believers. And community for me means where we actually interact with each other on a meaningful level. And one of the ways that that happens is in the small group movement. During my illness, not only during my illness, but in many times of decision making, that group has become a key kind of engagement for us and has really become a mini version of the larger congregation. My vision would be for more of our congregations to experience themselves as Christian communities where dialogue together and make decisions together and share together in both at the corporate level but also in small groups. I hear in people selecting worship is what can the church do for me rather than how can I worship God in the context of the gathered community. How do I worship God in the midst of this, and how can I draw closer to God and be instructed in the faith in this context? I just think we have lost our way with all our materialism. And how do you set aside a portion of your income at the front end, not at the back end where we say, I'll give what I have left over to the church? And that's where I think planned giving is extremely important. And we have to model that. And we often talk about how we do that as parents. We do it as parents with children. We do it as members of the church with others. And that's another thing to talk about in our care groups in the church. We have to rediscover the excitement of studying the scriptures. One of the phrases I often hear among Christian educators is we were becoming biblically illiterate. When we have a class on human relations or life experiences, the classes are full. When we have a course on Bible study, you'll get 5, 6, 7 people. Now, why is that? Why can't we have more excitement and make the scriptures come alive and really help us discover the richness and the relevance of scripture for today? But so I think we need to rediscover the narrative of scripture as God's story of the past, also for God's story in the present. It might also be helpful at times if we learn again to bring our Bibles to church. But we also don't memorize scriptures the way we used to. Maybe we need to rediscover ways of reintroducing scriptures for ourselves to carry it to church as well. I would hope that we would experience a spiritual renewal. What do I mean? I guess again, for me, it comes back to the excitement of what God is doing in the church. I often talk about it as having the eyes of faith. One of the things I've often forced myself to do, and this comes from Sue Steiner, who was our pastor many years ago. She used to say at the end of a committee meeting, she says, now where has God been at work in this meeting? Where do you identify God as having worked in this was said, or in this activity, or in this program that we planned? And for me, that became a very, very important discipline. And so I often do that privately as well. And you know, that has also had a side effect of bringing a spiritual renewal into my life. In that it's more God consciousness in the average experience of life. And that has a spin-off effect of creating a spirit, for me, of creating a spiritual renewal.